thank you, Neda, and also Eric, for inviting me to give this presentation. You'll see where the title comes from very shortly. And Universal Peace. In what book is this written? That's a rhetorical question from Abdu'l-Bahá. And I want to thank the hosts for inviting me to this series and for the participants for watching. And I want to tell everyone that this updated version, which I had previously uploaded to academia.edu, my website that features a number of academic publications, I will update it after this presentation. Okay, by way of an introduction, let's go back to Egypt, Port Said, on June 19th, 1913. This is shortly after Abdu'l-Bahá had concluded his teaching tour in North America, the United States and Canada. And the date of this talk was June 19th, 1913. And there is a provisional translation, and as you know, the policy of the Universal House of Justice is quite liberal in allowing for provisional translations as long as they are labeled or identified as provisional and not authorized translations. Publication may require review at the Baha'i World Center, depending on the publisher, whether Baha'i, academic or non-Baha'i. So this question, in which holy book is this? That's the literal question from the original Persian, as I will show in a minute. It's in response to a couple of questions that, well, the same question that Abdu'l-Bahá was asked late in his trip to North America as to what is new in the teachings of Baha'u'llah. So here's one form of the question. On November 15th, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá was asked, what has Baha'u'llah brought that we have not heard before? And I want to say that there are hot links or web links to all of the graphics in this presentation, and also where you see a line. So this is the reference to the new Baha'i Reference Library, which you can click and find this text. And then again, on December 2nd, 1912, right before Abdu'l-Bahā's departure, he's asked again, you have asked me what new principles have been revealed by him, referring, of course, to Baha'u'llah. I could not find a photograph of the Hotel Sultani where this talk took place, but after Abdu'l-Bahā's arrival on June 17, 1913, in Port Said, he was in the Sultan Hotel, and there was a large tent that was pitched on the roof of the hotel where gatherings were held. And this was a gathering soon after Abdu'l-Bahā's arrival. So fresh on his mind, was his recent teaching experiences abroad in North America and Europe. Here are some contemporary pictures from Port Said, Egypt in the year 1913 or close to that. Now, the provisional translator is a talented young man named Adib Masumian. And here is his introduction. He says, what follows is a provisional translation, in other words, not official or authorized, of a talk that Abdu'l-Bahá gave under a tent pitched on the roof of the Hotel Sultani in Port Said, Egypt, on the evening of June 19th, 1913. A transcript of the original Persian text of this talk has been published in Khatabat, Khatabat-e Hazrat Abdu'l-Bahá, Volume 3, pages 76 to 78. As the first few sentences of the original Persian text of this talk are recorded in the second volume of Mirza Mahmud Sarkhani's Chronicle, it seems reasonable to assume that he, was the one who transcribed the full talk. And if that's the case, I anticipate that this talk will be authenticated and an authorized translation will follow sometime in the future. You know, Mahmud's diary is considered an important source and absolutely reliable, the diary, not all the talks themselves. We'll get to the authenticity of talks later on. Okay, now Abdu'l-Bahá begins this talk, and I'd like to ask one of the readers to read what Abdu'l-Bahá is saying here.
Joyce, please.
Now praised be God that the East is illumined and the West perfumed. When we were departing Tehran for Baghdad, there was not a single believer along the way. On this journey, however, whichever city in the West we passed through, we found Baha'is there. In places that had not heard it before, such as Denver, Dublin, Buffalo, Boston, Brooklyn, Montclair, Montreal, and so on, the call of God was raised. No tumult in the town or cities there, but for the curling lock of the friend's hair. No stir in all the world does one find now, except the curve of that companion's brow.
Thank you. All right, another reader, please, for this continuation of Abdu'l-Bahá's talk on June 19th, 1913 in Egypt.
Yeah, Kay, if you would, please.
The call of God was raised in such a way that every ear relished it. Every soul was stirred by it, and every mind astonished at it, inquiring, what call is this that has been raised? What star is this that is rising? One soul would be astounded, another would investigate, and yet another would adduce proofs. They would all declare that the teachings of Baha'u'llah are truly without peer, that they are the spirit of this age and the light of this century.
Thank you. Next reader.
Patsy.
At most, one would object that the gospel includes similar teachings, to which we would reply. Among these teachings is the oneness of humanity, in which of the books of the New Testament can this be found? Show us. And universal peace, in what book is this written? And that religion must be the cause of love and fellowship, and that without these, the lack of religion would be preferable. In which book is this stated?
Thank you. And I'll read this. And that religion must accord with sound reason and accurate science. In what book is this mentioned? And equality between men and women, in which book does one find this? And the abandonment of sectarian, religious, national, political, and racial prejudices, what book contains this? And so on and so forth. That is all. That's the provisional translation. Now, the talk is much longer and has very interesting information about the Baghdad period in which Baha'u'llah was asked to perform a miracle, much new historical information. And these links will take you to the provisional translation, as well as the Persian text. And the Ocean of Lights database also has the Persian text, and here's a link. And this is the full translation that we just read on the previous slides. And this is the text in Persian. Now, the Persian talks of Abdu'l-Bahá that are extant, in other words, that still exist, because a number of them, unfortunately, went missing. This is the cover of the first of 3 volumes of a text that for short we call Khitabat. And on the cover, you see something in Persian an inscription, and here's a translation. And then on another edition, this prayer by Abdu'l-Bahá was also published. Now in the first edition, you don't see this, but it's on the inside cover page, as I recall. And Abdu'l-Bahá says, praise be to God. No, this is Mahmud Zarqani, pardon me, stating this. Praise be to God, the all-glorious, the most effulgent, through the grace and bounty of the center of the covenant, referring to Abdu'l-Bahá, of course, the seven essence servants successfully compiled the talks from Abdu'l-Bahā's first journey to the countries of Europe in 1912 AD, equivalent to 1330 AH, after Hijra. They were all commended to his luminous and celestial sight and published at his instruction. And then the prayer from Abdu'l-Bahá, which is very short, says, O Lord, confirm Sheikh Faraj to render service at the sacred threshold, Abdu'l-Bahá Abbas. And Sheikh Faraj was the publisher of this volume. Two other volumes later appeared, but they were not authenticated by Abdu'l-Bahá, who had unfortunately ascended on November 28th, 1912, as I recall. And the first volume of this 3-volume series, Khatabat, was published in 1922, and the next 2 volumes later on. I believe it was in 1984 that they were republished in 1 volume in Germany. Now, as to the authenticity of the talks, this is a letter from, it's a memorandum from the research department, or it says here, excerpt from a letter dated January 3rd, 2022. So this is recent information from the Department of the Secretariat to Adib Masumian. Quote, as to the question of the authenticity of the other talks published in the 3 volumes of Khatabat, the research department has commented that the authenticity of each transcript would need to be examined individually. Owing to the pressure of work and limited resources, it is not possible for the research department to undertake such a task at this time. So there are 6 principles in my reading of Abdu'l-Bahā's Port Said speech. And I'm gonna, here I've identified principle 1, principle 2, principle 3 through 6. And we will refer to these principles throughout the presentation. What the translator Adib Masumian has done is to translate in a variety of ways this one recurring question, what we call a rhetorical question. It's a question in which the questioner already knows the answer or implies the answer. In der Kodam Kitab asked, which literally means this in which book is, with the verb coming at the end, or in other words, in which book is this? And book here is shorthand for holy book or sacred scripture. So in effect here, Abdu'l-Bahá is answering a question by posing a question. And for informational purposes, further information on this talk is found in Stephen Phelps' important scholarly resource called A Partial Inventory of the Works of the Central Figures of the Baha'i Faith. And I made it such that I hope this works in the PDF. If you click on the image, and then of course I've got another link too in the text version on the right-hand side to this very monumental resource that Baha'i scholars and others will use in the course of Baha'i studies. Now, in my reading of this June 19th, 1913 talk, this relates back directly. I didn't say this in the PowerPoint, but the more I study this, it's a direct reference remember this is my provisional opinion, to an important talk on November 15th, 1912 at the home of Baha'i artist Juliet Thompson in New York. The notes were by Hooper Harris, and I'm going to talk about, I didn't know who the translator was for this, but wherever I could identify the translator, as well as the reporter, the stenographer, or whoever it was, I do, and with some information on who that person was. So talking about this event, Juliet Thompson in her diary, can we have a reader read this diary entry, please?
Joyce?
On November 15, the master came to our house and gave a most wonderful talk in the front room on the first floor to a great crowd of people who filled both the front and back rooms and the hall. I brought George up from the basement and stood him on a chair so that he could see the master. He thought the master was God and was frightened. Driving down to us with Miss Champney, our Lord had said, "The time has come for me to throw bombs," and he threw them in his talk that night.
Thank you. Okay, George was a boy of Juliet Thompson's maid, and I think he was about 6 years old at the time. And his impression, he thought the master was God and was frightened, was quite interesting. And throughout the diary, there are some very interesting conversations between Juliet and George. And here, bombs doesn't mean this literally. It's, don't take it wrong. It's, I think Abdu'l-Bahá had reached, if I may say so, it's my impression that Abdu'l-Bahá had reached a point of a certain frustration that people were not responding as fully as could be or should be expected. So a number of the photographs and documents featured in this presentation are courtesy of the National Baha'i Archives. Okay, so since we lack a Persian original for this, I wanted to say something about Hooper Harris, who in fact was a professional court reporter. In other words, since each talk is going to have to be individually studied, apart from the talks that Abdu'l-Bahá approved in volume 1 of Khatabat, I want to make a case for this talk, the English transcript of this talk, to be considered reliable. Now, I'm a practicing attorney, and as you know, any out-of-court statement for the truth of a matter is considered hearsay, and here's the general rule of hearsay is that it's inadmissible as evidence. The court carves out a major exception for deposition testimony, which is sworn testimony in the presence of counsel for all parties, taken down by a professional court reporter. And depositions in civil law, probably in criminal law too, become part of the evidence of record. So it's very important to underscore the fact that Hooper Harris was a court reporter. And the information was that Mr. Harris worked by day, studied law at night, and was admitted to the bar in Birmingham, Alabama in 1893, and in 1894 came to New York City to live, where he became an expert court reporter doing work of unusually high quality till the very day of his death. And according to Shoghi Effendi, Hooper Harris was indeed one of the leading apostles of Baha'u'llah, which is an extraordinary statement. Very high compliment. And there's a larger picture of him. He was asked by Abdu'l-Bahá to travel teach to India in 1907, and this is a photo. And he was accompanied by Mirza Mahmud that you see on the left, and by an illustrious Baha'i teacher on the right, and with a colleague who is the one standing. So Mr. Harris is seated on the chair. So there's left to right, Mirza Mahmud Zarqani, Cooper Harris, Harlan Ober, and Hand of the Cause of God, Abdu'l-Bahá. Okay, here we see the first publication of the English transcript of this talk, and it's titled The Distinctive Characteristics of Baha'u'llah. Now, for a period of time, the name Baha'u'llah was spelled with an O for phonetic reasons, because the U is pronounced O, the short U is pronounced O in spoken Persian. All right, let's have a reader read this entry from Mahmoud's diary, please.
Okay, Patsy, and going forward, if it could just be Joyce and Patsy, thank you.
Do I read below where it says there was a public meeting?
Please do.
Okay. There was a public meeting in the evening at the home of Miss Juliet Thompson. The master spoke about the greatness of this cycle, the victory of the cause, and the influence and importance of the teachings and laws of Baha'u'llah. His talk was delivered in such awe-inspiring tones that the minds were dazzled and the hearts captivated by the grandeur and majesty of the center of the covenant. Both before and after the meeting, many people were honored to visit with him in a separate room.
Thank you. So here are 2 more pages of the original publication of this talk and the last 2 pages. Now, this particular slide talks about the reception that Abdu'l-Bahá got in churches and synagogues and so on. And the important focus of this talk will be coming up here. Would a reader please read this slide?
Some who could find no other pretext have said, these teachings are not new. They are old and familiar. We have heard them before. Therefore, I will speak to you upon the distinctive characteristics of the manifestation of Baha'u'llah and prove that from every standpoint, his cause is distinguished from all others. It is distinguished by its didactic character and method of exposition, by its practical effects and application to present world conditions, but especially distinguished from the standpoint of its spread and progress.
Thank you. This is a very important talk, and I'm going to just show you the slides because I'm going to revisit this talk in the form of its earlier version after reviewing the December 2nd, 1912 talk. So the titles, by the way, that I'm using here for these slides come from my book, Baha'i Faith, The Basics. Can people see me as well as the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I just hold it up so you can see what this book is. It's an introduction to the Baha'i Faith, published by Routledge, a leading academic press in the United Kingdom, but it's the first and only book I've written without any footnotes or endnotes. And it's aimed at the first-time reader. You've probably heard of the 4 Dummies and 4 Idiots series of introductory books. This is, I think, a more sophisticated series along those same lines, and it's a highly successful series. So they needed a PhD who could write simply. So the titles for Abdu'l-Bahā's principles are put in the form of short actions rather than just what they are. They're put in the form of what we should do. So search for truth here is one way of expressing the independent investigation of truth. As an action, we should search for truth. And here's another principle which I have expressed as see humankind as one. And as I said, we're going to revisit these later on. And this relates back to the Port Said speech. Among these teachings is the oneness of humanity. In which of the books can this be found? Show us. Religion respects science. Again, it relates back to the Port Said speech. Religion should unify. Again, that was mentioned in the Port Said speech. Abolish every prejudice. Again, that was emphasized in the Port Said speech. Men and women are equal. That was also mentioned in Egypt. Adopt a universal auxiliary language. Provide education for all. Work is worship. And the Baha'i faith offers other new principles. So I want someone to read this important statement, please.
I'll read. The Baha'i faith offers other new principles. The teachings of Baha'u'llah are boundless and without end in their far-reaching benefit to mankind. The point and purpose of our statement today is that they are new and that they are not found in any of the religious books of the past. This is an answer to the question, what has Baha'u'llah brought that we have not heard before? Therefore, it is conclusive and evident that the manifestation of God in this day is distinguished from all former appearances and revelations by His majesty, His power, and the efficacy and application of His word. Abdu'l-Bahá.
Thank you, Patsy. Very important statement. And again, Stephen Phelps, partial inventory. Stephen Phelps translated Arabic and Persian texts for many years at the Baha'i World Center in Haifa. All right, now we move to the December 2nd, 1912 speech at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Edward Kinney, as they would say back then. In other words, Edward Kinney and his wife, Carrie Kinney. Edward Kinney, the first home, apart from the hotel that Abdu'l-Bahá stayed in, was Edward and Carrie Kinney's home, and the last home during his sojourn in America, North America, was in the Kinney home as well. Edward Kinney, and I'm presuming his wife Carrie, had seen Abdu'l-Bahá in the Holy Land for 2 pilgrimages. So the notes are by Esther Foster, and unlike Cooper Harris, I could not find hardly anything on her. She is mentioned in one of the Baha'i World volumes in passing, and we don't know if this is the same person, but Stephen Collins searched in newspapers.com, and there's another Esther Foster, maybe the same person, whose occupation is listed as a stenographer, a professional stenographer. So once again, that would, Abdu'l-Bahá wanted these talks to be recorded as accurately as possible and published. That was his intended goal for these talks. Now let's talk about this photograph. I love this photograph. For years, it's been my favorite photograph. I used a version of this photograph as a frontispiece for my dissertation when it was published by the State University of New York Press, called Paradise and Paradigm, Key Symbols in Persian Christianity and the Baha'i Faith. So I'd like to give you some information about this photograph because it was taken on this very date, December 2nd, 1912, which adds a whole dimension of significance and character to this talk. The portrait was by Jacob Schloss, who lived from 1857 to 1938, and he was known as a celebrity photographer. And it was later published on August 1st, 1919 in Star of the West. Now, Schloss always copyrighted his portraits. So that's why I think it took a while to arrange for orders of this photograph to be sent and paid, because he was in the business of earning a living from being a professional photographer. Now, in addition to celebrities like mainly actresses from the stage and also silent films, He also photographed other important people. And here we see the First Lady, Edith Roosevelt, in this photo, which is called the First Lady of the Land. And I believe he took 6 photos of her. Here are 2 more. And here's a letter from Jacob Schloss to President Theodore Roosevelt, asking if he's ever in his neighborhood to come to his studio, and Jacob Schloss would take portraits of him. Now, I've determined through my interaction with the archives that there were 3 photographs taken that night. And what indicates that to me is that in addition to his typical copyright signature, he numbered these. So this is number 1, as you see in the bottom right corner. And this is Abdu'l-Bahá in the Kinney home with the Kinney family. This is a restored version. So if we go back, you know, this was scanned recently, so it's quite faded, and you see it's turned to sepia and so on. So the photographs that you see that are the same in Baha'i publications have been enhanced. The second photograph, which is marked 2, although the 2 is a little hard to see here, is with the translator, Ali Quli Khan, and his wife, Florence. And this was the first Persian-American marriage among the Baha'is. And here we see Jacob Schloss's stamp or address on the back, what we call the verso. The front is called recto when we talk about archival documents. And there's an enhanced version. And for these archival documents, I have provided the archival catalog information without the zeros. So here, this is photo ID P23194. And here's the third photograph, this immortal photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá taken by Jacob Schloss on December 2nd, 1912. Another version of the photograph, this was framed in the archives. And this is the photograph that has been enhanced, and it is available in the Baha'i Media Center at the Baha'i World Center, which you can access online. Now, the translator was identified as by a different name, which is a title. Kalantar means mayor. So Ali Quli Khan was his father was a mayor. And says stenographic notes by Esther Foster. In other talks of Abdu'l-Bahá, you just see the word notes. Here, it's important that it identifies these as stenographic notes. I don't know if they were taken in shorthand or how the stenographer took them. But again, in my opinion, the English transcript should be highly reliable. And as far as the English translators during Abdu'l-Bahā's North American sojourn, Dr. Robert Stockman, in his wonderful book, Abdu'l-Bahá in America, writes, 3 young Persians, Ali Quli Khan, Ahmad Sohrab, and Amin Farid, had resided in the United States over a decade, had mastered English, and were translating Baha'u'llah's works and Abdu'l-Bahā's tablets into English. And so here is Abdu'l-Bahá with Ali Quli Khan and Florence Breed Khan at the home of Safa and Vafa Kinney in New York City. Safa was the name, spiritual name that Abdu'l-Bahá gave to Edward Kinney, and Vafa to Carrie Kinney. So here's a little bit on Edward Kinney. And he's got a very important memoriam, published in a cablegram where Shoghi Effendi writes, can we have a reader read this, please?
Edward B. Kinney, grieve at passing of dearly loved, highly admired, greatly trusted, staunch, indefatigable, self-sacrificing teacher, pillar of faith, Safa Kinney, his leonine spirit, exemplary steadfastness, notable record of services, enriched annals of closing period of heroic age, and opening phase of formative age of Baha'i dispensation. Beautiful reward assured in Abha kingdom beneath the shadow of the master he loved so dearly, served so nobly, defended so heroically until last breath.
Thank you, Joyce. And this picture in the previous slide is taken from this group photo at a Unity Feast in New Jersey. And Carrie Kenny, both Edward Kennedy and Carrie Kennedy were called Pillars of the Faith and Pillars of the Cause of God, which is a very distinguished title as well. And Robert Stockman describes the this particular talk in his book, Abdu'l-Bahá in America. Here is the talk as first published in Star of the West, just a few days over a year later. So quite without too much of an interregnum. The second and third pages of this talk are pictured here, and the fourth and fifth pages are pictured here. Now, because of the shortness of time, I'm going to cycle through these slides by talking about what they're about rather than reading them. In this slide, Baha'u'llah revealed new teachings not found in the book, sacred books of former times. There are new teachings which cannot be found in any of the past books. Here's a principle: see humankind as one. That's my paraphrase. Again, this was mentioned as one of the 6 principles in Egypt. Search for truth. See religion as one. Religion should unify. Again, that was mentioned in Port Said. Religion respects silence. Again, women and men are equal. Abolish every prejudice. Promote world peace. You see how consistent, thematically consistent these talks are. Provide education for all. Economic problems require spiritual solutions. The universal house of justice is unique. This is a Baha'i principle. The special Baha'i covenant protects Baha'i unity. Could we have a reader read this important slide, this important statement by Abdu'l-Bahá?
As to the most great characteristic of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, a specific teaching not given by any of the prophets of the past. It is the ordination and appointment of the center of the covenant. By this appointment and provision, he has safeguarded and protected the religion of God against differences and schisms, making it impossible for anyone to create a new sect or faction of belief. Abdu'l-Bahá.
Thank you, Patsy. And the Baha'i faith offers other new principles. Joyce, would you like to read this?
The teachings of Baha'u'llah are boundless and illimitable. You have asked me what new principles have been revealed by him. I have mentioned a few only. There are many others, but time does not permit their mention tonight. I therefore pray to God that you may be strengthened in good deeds. I pray that God may confirm you in order that you may live according to the teachings of Baha'u'llah.
Thank you, Joyce. More information on this text in Stephen Phelps' partial inventory of the works of the central figures of the Baha'i faith. All right. I'm using the term a new gospel, which is from Shoghi Effendi, and he says its implications are deeper, its claims greater, referring to the claims of the Baha'i faith, than any which the prophets of old were allowed to advance. It constitutes a challenge, at once bold and universal, which must, in the ordinary course of events, as shaped and controlled by providence, give way to a new gospel, fundamentally different from and infinitely superior to what the world has already conceived. And this is from the World Order Baha'u'llah. And since the new Baha'i Reference Library gives paragraph numbers, if you so choose to view them, and not page numbers, the link is here, which will take you directly to the text. All right, now I used this approach for my book, Baha'i Faith, The Basics. And the way I organized this took a lot of thought and planning. You see the chapters here, and they're meant to reflect the contemporary activities of the Baha'i world at present, including and especially emphasizing community building, social action, and public discourse. In the chapter 3, Principles, Baha'i Social Teachings, I relied heavily on Abdu'l-Bahá's response to the question, what did Baha'u'llah bring that is new? So in following Abdu'l-Bahá as the perfect exemplar, he was the paragon of Baha'i virtues, but remember, he was also the authorized interpreter of Baha'u'llah's teachings, and his teaching example, his engagement in public discourse and in teaching the faith are examples that we should study and emulate. So here's a picture from page 42 of Baha'i Faith, The Basics. And I talk about the term relative. I think it's important to use it relatively, not absolutely. And, I refer back to the question on Friday, November 15th, 1912. Abdu'l-Bahá was asked the following question: what has Baha'u'llah brought that we have not heard before? And again, the question that Abdu'l-Bahá was asked: you have asked me what new principles have been revealed by him. And his answer was, I will speak to you concerning the special teachings of Baha'u'llah. And so in this introductory book to the Baha'i Faith, I've focused on these two talks. Now, since there is no Persian transcript available, they are not wholly authenticated. So as a way to add to their authentication, I added parallel statements from the tablet to the Hague. And here are the Baha'i principles expressed as dynamic actions. And I identified 15, but of course there are many more. Search for truth. Remember, this is an action, not just a term or a description. Search for truth. See humankind as one. See religion as one. Religions should unify. Religion respects science. Men and women are equal. Abolish every prejudice. Promote world peace. Provide education for all. Economic problems require spiritual solutions. The Universal House of Justice is unique. The special Baha'i covenant protects Baha'i unity. Adopt a universal auxiliary language. Work as worship. The Baha'i faith offers other new principles. Now, I want to go through the November 15th talk because what I discovered in preparing this presentation, which I had not considered at the time of writing my book, Baha'i Faith, The Basics, is to compare the original publication, based on the court reporter's transcript, Hooper Harris's transcript, with the edited version edited by Howard McNutt in Promulgation of Universal Peace. So Joyce, would you read the bottom quotes, both on the left and the right?
In which one of the sacred books of the past do you find the announcement of this principle? The announcement of this principle is not found in any of the sacred books of the past.
See the difference? In the original transcript, English transcript, there Abdu'l-Bahá is expressing a rhetorical question, whereas in the answer, as edited by Howard MacNutt, it's a categorical answer. And you're going to see this pattern throughout the talk. Patsy, would you like to read the part in gold here? Patsy.
Yes. Right below where it says, in what scriptures?
Yes, please.
Thank you. In what scriptures do you find such a statement? In what sacred record can you show such a teaching? No other scriptures contain such breadth and universality of, thank you, of statement. No other teachings proclaim this unequivocal principle of the solidarity of humanity.
Thank you, Patsy. You know, I have a diaresis here inside square brackets, meaning that there's text missing, whereas the text on the right by Howard MacNutt is the full passage, where he has actually left out a couple of, one or two intervening sentences. All right. Again, we find this particular pattern. Joyce, do you want to read these two gold texts?
Where do you find any such statement as this in any of the sacred books? This principle has not been revealed in any of the former books of divine teaching.
Okay, and the principle at issue here is that religion and science, the harmony of religion and science, or as I put it, religion respects science. In other words, should respect science. So on the issue, on the principle, religion should unify. Patsy, it's your turn, right?
Sorry, I had to take my dog out.
Okay.
In which one of the sacred books do you find such a statement? This is a new principle of revelation found only in the utterances of Baha'u'llah.
Thank you. Now, do you see the editorial hand of Howard MacNutt at work? I have a great deal of respect for him. I have several articles on him in a series that I think is 69 or 70 articles long for BahaiTeachings.org, which is, the series is called The Universal Emancipation Proclamation, and it focuses on African American history within Baha'i history. So again, we see this same pattern of Abdu'l-Bahá asking a rhetorical question, you know, after talking about another Baha'i principle of Baha'u'llah, here abolish every prejudice, or what he says here, prejudice in all its forms must be abolished. So Abdu'l-Bahá asks a rhetorical question, but in the edited version and promulgation, it's stated as an answer. Here, there is no rhetorical question. But in the next principle, adopt a universal auxiliary language. No rhetorical question there, but it comes up again. Joyce, would you like to read the gold text?
In which one of the sacred books you find such a text? This practical remedy for the need of the world cannot be found in the text of any other sacred books.
Thank you. And Patsy, do you want to read the gold text here, please? Patsy? Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry. Therefore, if anyone should raise an objection and ask the question,
The gold text
oh, I'm sorry.
top, here it's on top, okay?
The point and purpose of our statement today is that these teachings are new and that they are not found in any of the religious books of the past. The point and purpose of our statement today is that they are new and that they are not found in any of the religious books of the past.
Okay, here's an example of Howard McNutt closely following the original text. And here we see from the archives a copy of his handwritten edit prior to the publication of the Promulgation of Universal Peace, which I think has been published in 3 editions, if I'm not mistaken. Another editing. This is about the most great characteristic of the revelation of Baha'u'llah at the bottom, but at the top, this is about the House of Justice. And here we're going to compare the original published English transcript with the edited version. So Joyce, would you like to read this?
The 11th teaching is the organization called the House of Justice, which is endowed with a political as well as a religious aspect. It embodies both aspects, and it is protected by the preserving power of Baha'u'llah himself. A universal or world House of Justice shall be organized. That which it orders shall be the truth in explaining the commands of Baha'u'llah, and that which the House of Justice ordains concerning the commands of Baha'u'llah shall be obeyed by all. But that will be the House of Justice organized from amongst the members of the houses of justice of the whole world, and all men shall be under the supervision of that House of Justice.
Okay, so this is the English transcript as published in Star of the West in 1913. It was part of what was called a special teaching issue. And Patsy, would you like to read this edited version?
He has ordained and established the House of Justice, which is endowed with a political as well as a religious function, the consummate union and blending of church and state. This institution is under the protecting power of Baha'u'llah himself. A universal or international House of Justice shall also be organized. Its rulings shall be in accordance with the commands and teachings of Baha'u'llah, and that which the Universal House of Justice ordains shall be obeyed by all mankind. This International House of Justice shall be appointed and organized from the houses of justice of the whole world, and all the world shall come under its administration.
Thank you. Okay, so here are my conclusions for what they're worth. Abdu'l-Bahá's June 19th, 1913 talk in Port Said, Egypt, sheds new light on his prior responses to questions as to what is quote unquote new in Baha'u'llah's teachings on November 15th, 1912 and December 2nd, 1912 in New York. A close comparison between 1, the first publication of these 2 talks in Star of the West magazine, and 2, their later edited republication in the Promulgation of Universal Peace, shows that the earlier versions were probably more true to the original. This is most evident in the November 15th, 1912 talk, where in editing the text for republication and promulgation, editor Howard McNutt turns Abdu'l-Bahá's rhetorical questions into categorical answers. For Baha'is, Abdu'l-Bahá's approach has potential and possibly profound implications for public discourse, considering his role as the perfect exemplar, not only as a paragon and paradigm of Baha'i virtues, but as a model for how best to teach the Baha'i faith. And let's end with a couple of additional readings about the newness of Baha'u'llah's principles. Joyce, is it your turn?
Yes. Out of this pitch blackness, there dawned the morning splendor of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. He hath dressed the world with a garment new and fair. And that new garment is the principles which have come down from God. The people, therefore, must be set completely free from their old patterns of thought, that all their attention may be focused upon these new principles, for these are the light of this time and the very spirit of this age.
So this is an absolutely authenticated text with an authorized translation. It comes from selections from the writings of Abdu'l-Bahá. And Patsy, would you read this final quotation, please?
Unless these teachings are effectively spread among the people, until the old ways, the old concepts are gone and forgotten, this world of being will find no peace, nor will it reflect the perfections of the heavenly kingdom. Strive ye with all your hearts to make the heedless conscious, to waken those who sleep, to bring knowledge to the ignorant, to make the blind to see, the deaf to hear, and restore the dead to life. It behooveth you to show forth such power, such endurance as to astonish all beholders.
Isn't that an amazing teaching from Abdu'l-Bahá? I don't know if any of us can live up to it, but that's what he's asking us to do. So here are my acknowledgements, which will be Edward Sevchik, the archivist at the National Baha'i Archives. The U.S. National Baha'i Archives has been very, very helpful in giving me, sending me these important photographs, archival photographs and documents. And now we can open it up for questions and discussion. Thank you, Nita.
Yeah, of course. I think this was absolutely amazing.
I have always heard that the Universal House of Justice only is a religious leader, not politics, and it's going to be separate. This is the first time I hear that the Universal House of Justice is the leader in religious and politics. Could you please elaborate in that?
Sure, that's an excellent question, Shireen. Well, first of all, when I define politics, I like to define it broadly as, you've heard the expression, the body politic.
Yes.
It's a, familiar expression in English, referring to all of humankind. And of course, Shoghi Effendi said we should avoid partisan politics like the plague. But in other respects, politics, more broadly speaking, is really about human affairs. So if we can disambiguate and disengage, even though they're connected in practical terms, partisan politics from the body politic, in which we address political solutions in the form of spiritual principles and social principles. As to the distant future, right now, I hesitate to speculate. For the time being, we live in the era of the lesser peace, which is gradually unfolding and evolving in degrees. And we have religious pluralism, we have multinationalism at work, and so on and so forth. So there is no Baha'i state, there is no Baha'i country in which there is a majority. Therefore, there's no official political involvement of the Baha'i faith institutionally, only at best in an advisory and exhortatory capacity. So we are called upon to try to influence society by providing model communities and making the Baha'i solutions to the world's problems known at the level of principle. So I see no political involvement in the narrow sense whatsoever practiced in the Baha'i community at present.
Thank you.
I just love the way you've captured, especially the principles, the 6 principles. And I know a lot of people are going to have to go back to this presentation to reread those and to tie those in. So that was wonderful.
I would like to comment, and Sam, I very much second what Nida June mentioned. The level of depth and research is pretty incredible, and I'm used to that from Dr. Beck, but still, I'm not just happily surprised every time. What I really appreciated actually is that connection when you made for us the Baha'i principle expressed in action, which I thought was really much in line with actually the whole message that Abdu'l-Bahá had in his talks, and make it very practical. And I think you brought for us a very simple, very, very effective new twist in looking at the principles and just bringing them into actionable items, which I don't think I have heard before, to be honest, or seen. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate that comment. Thanks for noticing that new twist, as it were.
Let me just make sure and see if there's anybody else here. No, yeah.
Andrew.
Oh, Andrew, please. Yep. Remember to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that insightful information. It's amazing to see the level of detail you've gone into. And I'm kind of go out on a limb here. You, in one of your other videos talks that I picked up, you referred to a way to include non-Baha'is, in particular the agnostics of the world. And I don't know if you could perhaps clarify that a little bit for me, because I didn't quite get it.
Are you including atheists too?
Correct. Yes. Yes. Oh, well, and the reference was to, you know, the universal spirit or that kind of aspect, because yeah, that was particularly interesting for me.
Well, I don't recall my exact statement, but in terms of my thinking on that is one of the ways that we, in effect, translate and communicate the Baha'i principles is to universalize them.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting Baha'i world essay by the first African-American Rhodes Scholar, Dr. Elaine Locke. I call him Alan Locke, which was published in the Baha'i World volumes. Shoghi Effendi invited him to contribute 4 essays, which he did. And one of his essays is called Unity Through Diversity, which is a very interesting twist in that phrase. And one of his messages is that we should not, you know, focus so much on the source of the Baha'i teachings as on their universality, to put it in my own words. Now, in translating these to our respective audiences, if our audience are agnostics or atheists, we don't talk about the source, because that would be irrelevant. And so we proclaim them as important and beneficial and necessary social principles for, you know, politicians, leaders, thinkers. You know, when we think of Baha'u'llah's proclamation, we think of Baha'u'llah proclaiming his mission to kings and ecclesiastics, right?
Yeah.
But Dr. Nader Saidi provided a provisional translation of a text in which Baha'u'llah says that, in my paraphrase, first he proclaimed his mission to mystics, then divines, then leaders or kings. And then in an article that a Russian Baha'i scholar, Dr. Yuli Ioannessian, and I published in 2010 in Baha'i Studies Review, where we, based on some manuscripts that I ordered from Cambridge University from the Brown papers, Edward Grenville Brown papers, and that Dr. Ioannessian had access to in the Rosen archives in St. Petersburg, Russia. We came to the conclusion that Baha'u'llah intended the Tablet of Glad Tidings to be translated and published into Western, and that he addressed this not only to these principles, not only to religious leaders, but to and divines, but to scholars, and statesmen as well, which is a new finding. So the proclamation of Baha'u'llah in terms of this research may be considerably broader than we had first imagined. And in this broad proclamation, you know, I used to teach research writing at Michigan State University with an American Studies focus. And the first thing we teach our students is, you know, who are you writing to? Who is your audience? So the question of audience becomes important when teaching the faith.
Thank you. That's great. So in that way, the revelation of Baha'u'llah is open to everybody. The revelation is for all mankind, the universal mankind. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just got a question. Someone had asked me, and it relates to, I guess, the king of Samoa was a king, right? But I don't have enough knowledge about the politics part or governing part of a king. So she had asked me, well, if we don't participate in politics, how is it that he became a Baha'i? I don't know if my question is clear.
My understanding is that he became a Baha'i
After.
individually, not officially, not in his capacity as, I can't remember the term that's used for him other than king of Western Samoa. And as you know, the first monarch to accept the faith was Queen Marie of Romania. She was taught by Hand of the Cause of God, Martha Root. But I believe she was not a reigning monarch at that time, whereas the king of Western Samoa was. I think that he was probably, this is my speculation, carefully counseled to avoid any efforts to cross boundaries, as it were, between political and non-political spheres of activity. So that's my limited understanding. I have not studied this issue with respect to the King of Western Samoa, but it's something worth investigating. And if you find out some information, I'd like to know.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's it for our questions and answers. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Buck, for your time. And again, if people are interested in the presentation, please feel free to email me. My email's in the chat and we will send it to you.